Hola, mi gente. Welcome to another episode of the Wine Chisme podcast. I am here with Pat. So do you prefer Pastor Reginald Sherman or just Reginald Sherman? What do you prefer?
Just Reginald Sherman. I'm actually a minister. I'm not a pastor.
Okay, minister. Well, actually, what is the difference between a minister and a pastor?
A pastor has his own church that has ministers in the church
Ah,
that serves God.
okay. Okay, I get that. I get that. I mean, I don't think I ever paid enough attention to that, but hey, we're always open and to learning additional information and new information. Um, so let me read your bio. I don't know if you're drinking wine. I am drinking wine. It's afternoon here, so and even if it wasn't, well, I wouldn't be the wine and cheese man if I didn't. So, Reginald Sherman hails from the vibrant city of Greenville, South Carolina. Born into a lineage steeped in the traditions of pastors, ministers, leaders, tracing back to the influential pastor A.B. Sherman, his grandfather. From an early age, Reginald was immersed in the remarkable journey of his grandfather, witnessing the establishment and leadership of churches, as well as the ownership and operation of a community convenience store, an extraordinary feat achieved with only a third grade education. More than a familiar figure, Pastor A.B. Sherman served as both mentor and guide to Reginald, gradually evolving into a prominent community leader. Inspired by the legacy of his grandfather and his cousin, Pastor Johnson, Reginald adopted a leadership mentality that he has seamlessly integrated into his everyday life. His professional trajectory unfolded with leadership roles in various companies where he became a respected figure in his community. In 2004, Reginald attained licensure as a minister, making the commencement of his leadership journey as the head of an outreach ministry. His compassion extending to aiding the homeless, mentoring individuals facing life's challenges, and guiding the youth at the Palmetto Boys Shelter. In a bid to enhance the effectiveness of churches in their communities, Reginald established outreach ministries and became a motivational speaker, addressing diverse audiences, including businesses, the Salvation Army, prisons, and numerous conferences. His commitment went beyond words, as evidenced by his class From Jail to a Job, designed to support individuals upon their release from prison. Through these experiences, Reginald developed a profound understanding of leadership, emphasizing the crucial elements of leadership development, spirituality, and servanthood. For him, success in leadership hinges on elevating and empowering one's team, fostering a culture of mutual success and service. With fervent belief in servant leadership, Reginald advocates for clarity in goals and visions, coupled with a hands-on approach to helping others succeed. He passionately asserts that as leaders, we are not only servants to God, but also stewards of service to God's people. Lovely. Fun fact, I actually grew up going to the Salvation Army Church.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I kind of stated, and we'll get into it later, right before we got in, that I no longer attend church. I am still a believer, but I no longer attend church. And I think oftentimes people are finding their their faith in their own way. I think people and I think you see it in a lot of different things. People are losing faith in the leaders of many churches, not all churches, but many churches, and especially when within the of what is happening in today's world. When you grow up in this household, right? And they were like they're called PKs, right? Preachers' kids and everything like that. How is it when you grow up? Because not only like it seems like your family, you were surrounded by that of people who led in the church. Is that a lot? Like, let's just start there. Is that just a lot of pressure when you're a kid to be surrounded by that and feeling like you have other people's expectations on you all the time?
I get that question a lot. It really wasn't, and I'm gonna tell you the story, and it's gonna probably blow your mind a little bit. So my grandfather and grandmother had 11 kids, right? My mom, it was seven girls, four boys. My mom was the only one that had a child out of wedlock in my family. So it became a little different with me. My family members would tell me things like I would never amount to anything because I was born out of wedlock. I mean, they had this whole religious mentality that they had that was carrying with them, and they treated me differently as like I didn't really belong. I was not going to amount to anything in my life because of that. Well, I think the biggest game changer in my life was my grandfather. As you read about him, he kind of mentored me through my childhood as a young man, and it kind of, I guess, kept me on the rails. And as I grew through life, I kind of I really didn't understand why I was being kind of treated that way for family members because that's kind of cold. But then again, you look back on it and you say, hey, this is what religion does to people. Um, I didn't. I carried a chip on my shoulder for many, many years, not because I was mad at them because of their belief, but the chip I had was I wasn't gonna let them say I told you so about me in life. So that's why all the hard work and all the grind and all the things I did came into place. And I've just been that way, all my life. I remember, one time I got left out we was at a family barbecue and everybody decided like to go to the mall. So we was piling up in the cars with, with family members, and they looked at me and said, "Hey, where are you going?" And left me out there in the yard.
Oh
And
my gosh.
yeah, so my grandfather came outside and he was kind of upset about it, and he was like, "Hey, if he can't go, nobody's going." Well, at that particular time, his daughters was grown, married, and had kids, and all of that, so he really couldn't stop them. But what he did, he told my mom, he reached in his pocket and pulled out all this money and gave it to my mom and said, "Hey, take him to the mall and get him anything he wants." And so I'm in the mall. This is the craziest part about it, with all these bags in my hand, passing my cousins on the other side of the mall. They're going one way, I'm going another. They looking at me like, "What in the world?" But um, all my life is, it made me who I am today, and I don't hold any grudges because that's what religion, and I'm very against religion, um, because it programs people a certain way. They think a certain way. They don't live the life that they should, and things like that. They live a life of bondage, and I think religion just keeps you in bondage.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to get back to that. I just totally forgot to introduce the wine that I'm drinking.
Okay.
I'm having a Sancerre. It's by Latoit Terrier, and it's love. I don't know. It's a one I got at Trader Joe's. And it's actually pretty good. I had it in another episode. So I always say salud, how we start the podcast. But I was just like, so I wanted to just get into it. So salud, Reginald. I totally agree with what you're saying in regards to religion because like I said at the top, I grew up going to the Salvation Army. And but oftentimes people don't realize Salvation Army is actually a church as well. They just think of it the thrift store or like what they do in regards to helping people overcome addiction and stuff like that. But it's an actual church. Started in England back in the 1800s. We have to learn like all the history of it and everything like that. Um, but I always find it really and I'll share kind of what my like what led me to leave the church because I used to go to a mega church when I lived in Dallas. And um in 2016, when we had Trump running for office, the pastor basically went up and told everybody to don't vote for the person, vote for the party. So he basically went up there and told everybody to work and to vote for Trump. And then he started bringing people in, like the where I went was the downtown campus where there was a lot of diversity. And then all of a sudden you started seeing that diversity kind of leave because with the leadership. Then all of, his daughters got married. So now his daughter and her husband are like the lead pastors at that campus, like a lot of nepotism, obviously. You start seeing the diversity leave within that campus. And I think just in generally, but then bringing speakers in who and I was part of the worship team and I loved it. Right. So when you're up there and when you feel like you're faking the funk, so to speak, that's when you know it's time to go. And the only reason I stayed was because I was moving back to California. So I was like, well, I loved the people, but I just didn't love the messaging that was happening anymore. And when you're saying like it keeps you in bondage and it does these, I think that's such a huge thing because it does. I feel like when you go and you're in religion, um, it's so much about and every pastor has their own way of interpreting the Bible, right? So it's basically what that pastor believes the Bible is saying and not necessarily what the Bible is saying because we know it's been translated over and over and over and over again and things get lost in translation. Is this something that you have found within like your experience growing up? Because especially when you're saying like growing up, you would think that all these people would embrace you and love you and say, you know what, we're going to make sure that you are loved regardless of the circumstance you were born. And here you are in this family of very religious people like shunning you.
Yeah, I believe this. People can put a title on themselves. They can say they believe in God and all of this stuff, Jessica. But what I've realized, it doesn't matter if you're a pastor, you're minister of music, praise and worship leader, whatever the case may be. Damaged people will damage people, regardless of who you are. You got pastors that's damaged. You got ministers that's damaged. You got worship leaders that's damaged. And all they do is damage other people because that's all they know.
Yeah, I think you having somebody like your grandfather showing you what love actually is, right? And showing you like I tell people or when I talk about even within my own family and with myself as well, right? We can't live based on our like you can't let your circumstances depend on who you grow into because you get to choose who you grow into. Does it have an effect? Absolutely. It absolutely has an effect. But if we continue to lean on those like the bad things that happen to us, then it's so hard to break out of the break out of your situation. How like being in that situation and being in this was what was kind of like the driving point that was like, you know what, I know you said you were like, I'm not going to let them think this of me. But how do you continue to keep that mindset if that's something that you just grow up with? Like if that's constantly getting thrown at you, I would imagine, especially as a young person, it gets tiring to always feel like you're fighting for the respect of your family or your friends or whatever. Like how do you keep going when you're especially when you're a young person to feel like this is for you and not for anybody else?
My grandfather taught me a lot. I'm going to say that. And he taught me how to be disciplined. He taught me hard work. He taught me grind. He taught me how to believe in myself. And some of the things that kept me going, I'll tell you one in particular stood out to me that he was telling me one day how special I was, how powerful I was, and I'm gonna be set apart from everybody else. And it was telling the story when I was a baby, and my grandfather had me on his shoulders, walking me around on his shoulders, had it and had his hands on my head, and I was and my grandmother looked at him and said, "Hey, AB, put that baby down so he can go to sleep." And he said, you don't even know what I'm doing to him right now. He said, I am anointing him as we speak. And when I heard that story and saw my grandfather's life and how powerful and how anointed he was, the man of God he was, I knew it was something on my life, and I knew it was something that he put on me at the end of the day that made me keep going. Now, situations does different things with different people because coming from a single parent home, Jessica, it was me and my little sister and my mom. And we didn't have any money. It was times I saw my mom come home from work. She working 3 jobs. She played for 7 choirs in the church and went to college at the same time. And she would come home at night from work and go to bed, and she would tell us that she's not hungry. She had a big lunch, but I knew that was a lie. We didn't have enough food. It was just enough for me and my sister. And she would go to bed hungry. And I would see those things. I think some people, when they get in situations in life, it taps them out. But then some people, when you get in a situation, it rises you up. And I rose up when I saw this. I'm like, hey, we either going to be like this or we're going to have to do something to make this thing better. So I remember going to Burger King one time. We really didn't go to Burger King that much, maybe once every 4 months, because we didn't have any money. And I remember going to Burger King, and I'm 13 years old. And I looked at the manager because the manager, he kind of had the hots with my mom, I could tell, right? And I went up to him. I said, hey, man, I said, I need a job. And my mom was like, you can't work it. You're too young. You're 13 years old. And what about school and all of this? I said, I will make it work. And the manager said, well, he can work at 13. You just have to sign a waiver for him. And my mom was against it. And I called her to the side because we were in line. I called her to the side. I said, Mom, let me talk to you for a second. I said, I saw when you came home the other night and you went to bed and didn't have any food. You went to bed hungry. I said, I'm never going to see that happen again. I said, I need you to sign this waiver for me so I can help you. And she said, okay. She said, you just make sure those grades stay right and things like that, or you're going to have to quit. I said, okay, sign. She signed it. 13 years old, I'm working at Burger King.
Wow. I'm so glad you brought up your mom because I was going like literally that was kind of the next question I was going to ask because obviously your grandfather had a very huge impact on your life and I love that but I was going to ask like what kind of impact because obviously for the first 4 years of my life it was just me and my mom as well. Um what but I think I was too young. I do remember some things, but I think I was too young to remember other things. And just like the Black community, the Latino community, we kind of all get together. So I was when my mom got pregnant with me, it was like, oh my gosh. But then when I came, it was like, oh, it was so I kind of had the opposite like thing. It wasn't like shunned. It was like I was the baby. I was like the favorite for and um but what kind of impact like obviously that made an impact at a very young age because you wanted to start working because you didn't want to see your mom come home hungry but beyond that what kind of impact was like did you see because obviously single mothers work very very hard. They have to be the mom and the dad. They have to be the provider. They have to be the disciplinarian and the caregiver. They have to kind of be all of these things. So in your household, what did you see when you saw your mom as a single mom growing up?
Well, when I saw my mom, I saw a remarkable woman. I saw a woman woman of faith, a woman that was a hard worker and had goals and aspirations, and she was going for it. And I saw that in her life, and I think that's the reason I'm a part of who I am right now. Eventually, yeah, she did it, man. She bought like the biggest house in the whole family. She did all the stuff and being a single mom. I think one of the biggest things I used to have to what I used to try to do. I spend a lot of time like on the weekends. My grandfather would come get me, you know, and I'll go stay with them, my grandparents. During the summer when school's out, I'm there the whole summer. helping them with the store and stuff like that because we had a convenience store right next to the house with a meat market in it and all that kind of stuff. Then a church right next door to the store. So I was with him a lot, and I think that I want to kind of give mom take some pressure off mom. You can have your weekends or the time or whatever, and summertime I go stay with him. He wanted to be worried about feeding me, So, but yeah, she was a remarkable woman. And I'll tell you this, Jessica. People, and I've heard people look at being raised in a single parent home as if it's like a terrible thing. I don't recommend it, for kids because it gets tough putting the burden on one individual, one parent. But I have seen people have this grudge against, just say, for instance, their father. Father tried to come back in their life and they was like 35, 40 years old and they like don't have nothing to do with him. My situation, my mom and dad actually reunited when I think I was about 30,
Oh
30 years
wow.
old. Yeah, and they've been married ever since, and I'm 52 years old now. They they um they were married, and then I had to get back with my dad and try to you know connect and everything, and he's an awesome dad. So I never, I thank God I didn't have those animosities. I had moments in my life where I was angry with him, but I was the kind of guy I always listened, and I always used to try to hear God's voice, and I used to try to hear, what's my next thing in life, or what's my next purpose. I was always a purpose driven guy, but it was one thing that stood out to me. I was in church, and it was a Father's Day, and the pastor was preaching this message, and he said that do not have a grudge against your father if he wasn't in your life. He said the person that's your father figure in your life that mentors you through your life, God sent him there for a reason.
Hmm.
He said because your real father may have messed your life up worse than what it really is.
Yeah.
And so I know that my grandfather, he had, it was God's plan for him to be in my life to be a father figure for me.
Well, it sounds like he was just an amazing father figure in your life, with all of the things that he was sharing and the wisdom and making sure you felt loved and making sure that you knew you were special. I would imagine, I would imagine when you're a teenager though, well, maybe you didn't because you did have such a prominent father figure in your grandfather. But I would also imagine like those times where you would have those negative thoughts. I would imagine those would often come when as a teenager, because I feel like as a teenager, you're trying to figure out who you are and your hormones and all of these things, all of these new experiences, all of these new things. Is that something like when were the moments, or did you ever feel like there were particular moments, right, that you felt that animosity or that anger towards not having a father who was present, even though you did have a grandfather, right? I Did you ever feel like, were there particular moments that made you have that anger towards your biological father?
Yes, it was life was a roller coaster, I would say. Um, I think one of the things that really stuck out with me, I didn't know how much I had bottled up inside of me till one day I was in school and my mom had just bought me a new pair of shoes. And keep in mind, there wasn't name brand shoes or none of that. We didn't have money for Nike and Adidas, and I can't even remember the name of the shoe. Probably didn't have a name on it, but it was. She did the best she could. So I had these sneakers on, and I went to school, and we had to go outside to kind of walk outside to exchange classes. Well, this guy, another kid, came up to me, and he basically spit on me, told me I was poor, and scuffed up my shoes that my mom had just bought me. And keep in mind, it was raining outside, so it was muddy and all that kind of stuff. So next thing I know, when I finally came to, the dude was, I just we
You blacked out. You had a
yeah,
blackout moment, a blackout angry moment.
yeah. So I did a number on him, and but the thing about it, I didn't do it because he spit on me. I didn't do it because he said I was poor. I did it because I'm looking at these shoes my mom worked so hard for to provide for me, and you think you're just gonna mess it up and that's gonna be it? No, so that's how it all went down. But when that happened, I said to myself, I said, I got some anger stuff built up inside of me that I need to address and I need to, tune in with.
So where do you go from there? Like where do you when you realize that? First of all, that's I think something that can be most teenagers might be like, well, he had it coming, right? But to be able to have that self-awareness of like, whoa, this is a problem. I need to get this addressed. Like that is really self-aware, especially as a teenager. So where do you go as a teenager when you're like, when I guess just where do you go? I mean, I don't really have any insight beyond that.
Well, first of all, you just got to understand. First of all, you got to go into a place within yourself and realize what you really got going on and where you at. But usually, I would just go talk to my grandfather. That's what I used to do. And he'll talk me through it, and he just had a way with me. At the end of the day, my mom always said that that he just had me spoiled and all that stuff. He didn't have me spoiled. He had me, I guess, kind of like the way I should be. He could manage me. He could um, lead by example, and I'll just follow. I pick
Right.
up like anything. So yeah, that was about it. I think I went to counseling one time, I believe, and that was like in the in school counselor. We talked about it, but I think once I understood that I had that built up in me, I was like, okay, you're gonna have to kind of figure out first of all the people you hang with, and you got to understand that you're gonna have to figure out, you know, um, just how to maneuver through, life, and stay away from negative people, stay away from people who would trigger you, and things like that. So that's what I did, and then I played sports too in school. That kind of took out, you know, a lot out of me.
What did you play?
I I started out playing football first. I was a wide receiver. Then I ended up for the most of my late middle school and high school. I played basketball.
I was an athlete growing up as well. I called myself a girly tomboy because I was a cheerleader and I played softball and I was a catcher in softball. So like total like polar opposites of what you would
Right.
think, right?
Right.
Um, and I think sports teaches you so much, right? Not only does it teach you discipline, it teaches you how to be a good well, maybe not to be a good loser, but it teaches you what it feels like to not win, right? To lose. But it also teaches you teamwork and how to work with other people. And I think sports is, maybe not sports because not every kid is into sports, but doing something in those groups, I think, is so vital in regards to how we grow up and how we work with people and how we relate to people and everything like that. What were the types of, like, were you able to discern the types of people that you should hang out with or shouldn't hang out with pretty quickly based on the things that your grandfather and your mom taught you? Or did you have to go through? I feel like most kids kind of go through that period where they kind of hang out with. They think these are their friends and then they find out, no, honey, they are not your friends. Like, did you ever go through that?
Right. I had the spirit of discernment pretty good. But the thing about me, once I chose my own path, then I kind of went in a direction that they weren't going. So keep in mind, my mom was still a single mom, and when I was in high school. Now, when I got to high school and got my driver's license, I'm working 3 jobs in high school and going to school.
Three?
Yeah. So,
Wow.
and that way I could have the name brand stuff because I felt like, when you get up there, people start bullying you because you don't have the clothes, you don't have the stuff. And keep in mind, I had a little sister that was right behind me in school, and I had to make sure, she can have what she got, and we can live pretty good, I guess you could say, or just have the things that other kids have. So my life went in a whole nother direction. When everybody else was hanging out and doing their thing, I wasn't with the crowd. I was at work somewhere. So that's the way it was. I think that's what separated me from a lot of stuff. I was in a whole nother direction at 16 years old, and most 16 years old don't do.
Did you go to college after you graduated high school?
I went to college, and it wasn't for me. I went to college. I said, you know what? You know, I got out of college, and I just ended up working basically in the trucking field. All my, for my whole career actually. And I ended up finding that it's crazy. I ended up finding that this one company that I worked for, I ended up with them, and then promotions came out. Promotions, then I started moving out of different. I think I moved 5 times in the first 10 years in
Oh,
different
wow.
cities, just relocating and stuff like that, just to go run facilities that were not achieving the goals that they're supposed to be achieving. So I had to go do all the cleanup, all the all the heavy lifting
Yeah.
for first 10 years of my career, and it was challenging, but I understood that I had a leadership mentality. I had a something, I had a difference maker in mentality when it comes to people, and
Sometimes, and that's, I think, like, I feel oftentimes people, I call myself a relationship builder as well. I'm able to like quickly build rapport with people, and people trust. First of all, I think people understand that I'm not trying, like, people know when people are not being authentic, right? People know, like, they pick up on that pretty quickly. Most people do. And, but I'm glad that, you said it wasn't for me in regards to college, because I think we have put so much pressure on that's where you need to go, that we don't realize like that's not the path for everybody. And even like trade schools, and there's all like, I'm sorry, but if you go to trade school, you probably make more money than somebody that goes to a 4-year university. I went to 4-year university and everything, but I'm, I think we forget all of those things. And oftentimes people that come from low income families and black and brown communities tend to go to trade schools and stuff. And we, you know, I think we need to stop pushing like you have to go to 4-year university, because you said you have a talent, a leadership talent. That was not something that was necessarily going to be explored or built upon in college. That's something that, is something that happens in real life, in practice, in doing it and learning about people, because there's a emotional intelligence that you don't that you get in the real world that you don't necessarily get in college. So thank you for sharing that, because I think that's so important to be able to share, saying, you know what, I went, it wasn't for me, because that's okay. Like, it doesn't have to be for everybody, because like you said, everybody has their own journey in life in regards to that.
right. And the thing about it, my CEO of the company actually called me one day, and he was like, "Man, where did you go to school? What business school did you go to learn how to run a business and things like that?" And I told him, I said, "Man, I didn't go to business school. I said I watched my grandfather run a store. I watched him run a church, and I said it's basically the same concept. We just dealing with more money now than what he had to deal with." I said, and that's where I learned it from.
Yeah. You eventually become a minister. You eventually, but what's the thing that led you there? Obviously, you had a huge influence from your family and from your grandfather, but that's not something I think you initially went into. But then you not only went into that, but you really went into like motivational speaking and motivational, like creating this podcast. And what was kind of like the thread or the road that led you there? Because I will say this, I was listening to a couple of your episodes. I love that they're very short, but very impactful, right? They're like, if you have a guest on, there might be about 30 minutes, but normally they're probably anywhere from 7 to 15 minutes long, just kind of like a bite size like start like you I think it's a great way to start your day, right? Of how are you gonna lead today? How are you gonna achieve your dreams today? Sometimes it's the smallest things, right? We don't want to get too bombarded with information because it can be very overwhelming. So to stick with something very small, I think it's great. But what was that journey in between um you know college is not for me. Now my boss is asking where I went to business school because you obviously have this leadership capability into, you know what? Now I think I'm going to follow in my grandfather's footsteps and get involved in the church. And then on the second like part of that, you were talking about you don't like religion. How do you how do you become a minister but not believe in the religion? Like how do you balance that as well?
Well, I'll share a story with you. When I was called into the ministry, when God called me into the ministry, I was having these dreams for 3 nights straight at 3 o'clock in the morning on the dot for 3 nights straight. And the dream was I was I heard myself like preaching. And then in the dream I saw a church. And then outside of the church in this field, I saw a bunch of people. And I dreamed that 3 nights straight. So I was obedient to God. I said, okay, God, I'll go do your will. So ended up going, and then I got licensed and things like that. Um, and all along, our people was telling me stuff like, "Hey, man, because of the generation and the legacy of my grandfather and all my other uncles and people like that, and my cousin, it was like, hey, you're gonna pastor a church one day, you're gonna get a church one day, and this and that." And I was allowed to preach at some conferences and go to other people's church. I actually went to a church one time, and the guy called me like on a Tuesday. He was like on the board, and he was like, "Hey, we really enjoyed you, and we looking for a pastor. Would you consider being our pastor?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll consider it." He said, "Well, can you come meet with us?" I said, "Yes." So I met with him, and I left, and then they ended up having another meeting after that. I got a phone call like the next day, and this guy said, "We got the board has one other question." And I said, "What is that?" He said, "Oh, you married?" I said, "No, I'm not married." He said, "Well, you can't be our pastor. You have to be married to be our pastor." I was like, "Okay." Well, basically, I think what I told, I said, "Look, man, if I ain't good enough, y'all go find better." And I just get off the phone. I had another incident that somebody said, "Hey, man, you can't pastor our church because you're not married." Well, I'm not going to run here and get married just to be a pastor. That doesn't make sense, So, but I think it was all in God's will for my life that I wasn't a pastor. And I actually went and preached at just one church one time, and after I preached there, this pastor called me and said that his congregation received me so well that he was willing to step down and give me his church. And I have never met this. That was the first
Wow.
time I ever been at this church. Yeah, it was crazy. And by that time, I was like, "No, man, I'm good with the pastor thing. I'm not gonna do this church thing, not like that." So I just decided just to start at our church. I was over the outreach ministry. So all we did was outreach outside of the church, man, homeless and um, going out and serving in the community. We had another minister of mine. We started out with just two people in a car, bringing them to church, and I think within probably 4 or 5 months, we had to get this 65 passenger bus that was parked
Oh
out back,
wow.
and somebody donated to the church, and nobody never drove it, so I had to go get somebody to work on the bus to get it started. Then I had to get somebody with a CDL license to drive the bus. So we got that started, and we was going to I think like a couple of halfway houses that people was transitioning, out of prison or addictions and stuff like that, and going to get them and bring them to church. So I found out that my calling And I think where I was with ministry is that I'm more up on the outreach side of it. I'm not in this. I feel like when you in the church sector, or you in um, certain roles in the church, you have to be and act a certain way. You have to. I've seen pastors talk in a pulpit, and I'm like, this dude won't really sound like this in real life. What is this voice coming from?
Right?
It's like, God
You're
said.
like, I
Yeah,
know
I'm
who
like,
you really are.
yeah, yeah, just be who you are, man. Don't talk like that. So it's I feel like being out there in the trenches, that's me. I built my life on being in the trenches, hard work, grinding, and getting things done, and helping people along the way. So that was the biggest thing for me. So that's why I stayed
But
at
you know
that
what?
level.
That's where it, like, when you read the Bible and everything, that's really where the work is supposed to be done. It's not supposed, like, church can be held. Two people discussing is church. Church is not necessarily a building, right? And I think there's this huge misconception, and I think it's because of it's been co-opted into this other thing, which is, frustrating, because when you have people like yourself in the streets doing the work, like in the community, and then you have people that are saying, oh, you can't do this, oh, you can't do this, oh, you can't do this, and trying to, you know make everybody view the world through their eyes and their eyes only. That also, like, I think that also loses the magic of what a belief is, and what this country should be, right? Because it's not a Christian based country. We're supposed to have religious freedom, and you can do good regardless of the religion that you're at. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean, like, oh, if you're Jewish, or oh, if you're Muslim. Oh, there's people of all faiths in the community doing the work. And then you have people who are behind the doors, behind the pulpit, spouting these things, and sometimes hateful rhetoric. And I think it's so important to focus on the work of the people that are actually doing the work, and not necessarily the people behind the pulpit.
Exactly, exactly. I really believe that when you're behind the pulpit, well, some ministers, when they're behind the pulpit, they're going to teach the Bible the way they know it. They're going to teach the scriptures the way they know it. And wherever, wherever the chips fall is where they fall. But here's the thing. You can teach somebody all about Christ. You can teach them all about God. But if you can't teach them about life, you know, what does it take in this thing called life? It takes hard work, man. It takes grinding. It takes going over and beyond. It takes having a level head. It takes all these things because you keep saying God is going to do it. You just letting people down. God does do big things. He does miracles. But at the end of the day, if you want to be successful, you're going to link up with God, but you're going to have to put in the work. And that's the part they miss.
Yes.
That's the part they miss. Because I remember so many
Yes.
times those guys at those transitional houses that we was picking up every Sunday, that we would hang out with them during the week, and we would hang out with them after church, we'd take them out to eat. When they reunited, a lot of them reunited, moved out, got their own jobs, reunited with their wives and their families. Their wife, I can't tell you how many times their wife has called me that I had never seen before and said, hey, you have made a big difference in my husband's life. He is a changed man. Now, keep in mind, we was taking them to our church every Sunday, but she didn't say the pastor did. She said I did, and my ministry
Yeah.
members did.
I
Because
mean,
we put
that's
in the
where the
work.
impact is made, right? I mean, and I want to kind of move into with what you do, into your podcast, which is called Real Talk with Reginald D. And like I was saying in the beginning, it's very, they're very short, they're very concise. What made you, like, you have the last one was motivational coaching question answer segment. So you're talking about what type of people you need to surround yourself with. overcoming the past to embrace your future potential. Um, you're talking about re-energizing your life and how to find your happy place. Rise above conquering life's uphill battles. The true meaning of Valentine's Day. Like you, there's a lot of these different things. So, what was it? Like I would imagine all of these things you're doing. You're like, how can I make a greater impact? What was it that led you to start the podcast, and how do you feel like it's been received? Have you had people say, "Oh my gosh, like thank you for this"? What's going on with that?
Yeah, we started the podcast. We started the podcast back in October 2022. I told my wife about that dream I just talked about me speaking, but I saw a church, then I saw people outside of the church, and I was like, God has showed me that church for a reason. And I think that he was showing me that just to say, hey, this is not where you're supposed to be. You need to be out here with these people. So we talked about it, and then she said, "Why don't you start a podcast?" And I was like, "Okay." I didn't know what a podcast was. I didn't really know how to do all that, but she's amazing, man. She's brilliant. So
You're sure. What is it? What do I need to do?
right, I just trust her. So we went with the podcast. Like I said, we started in October 2022. Um, you know, I've it comes out every Tuesday. We have new episodes every Tuesday. But here's the thing: the podcast became the top 1% podcast globally in February 2023. 4 months into it,
Wow.
which was amazing, and it has continuously ranked as the top 1%. So, and it's ranked in Apple Podcasts in 200 shows in 87 countries today, up to date. Now, let me stop you on that. 87 countries. Think about that. Those are those people outside of that church I'm supposed to be reaching. That's what it was. And it took all of these years for me to realize that. I was like, yo, that's that dream. That's that dream. I had a multitude of people I got to reach. And it's really been amazing. It was selected number 49 of the top 80 inspirational podcasts on the web. So it's really been a blessing.
No, I mean, I think, like I said, the combination of having these things that people I feel like we're talking about all the time, right? And so sometimes we can get so overwhelmed with information, but you keep yours very concise and very like within 15 minutes, unless you have a guest, right? But the fact that you're able to do this and kind of just get to the meat and get to the heart of what you're trying to share. Um, and in fact, when you were saying that, when you're like, going back to my dream, before you even said it, I was like, that was it. This is like his church, quote unquote. And the people outside the church are these listeners. So literally right before you said that, that's what I was going through my head.
Awesome.
Because I think it's true, right? Like there's such impact you can have in this type of platform and be able to reach so many people that you would never, if you were, but like you said, if you were behind a pulpit, you would never be able to reach these people. Even just within your community, you would never be able to have this kind of reach. So the fact that you're able to have this reach way beyond is such a huge is such a huge thing. How do you, like, when does it come to you in regards to what you should talk about? Is it usually what you feedback you hear from people, or is it like, you know what, I haven't talked about this, or oh wait, or is it conversations you've just had with people throughout the day? How do you figure out like what you want to spend that 10-15 minutes on for the podcast each week?
It's weird. It's weird. I know God's He's in it and He's speaking to me because this is what happens. You could say 15 minutes, right? We could say 15 minutes. It took me a week to come up with 15 minutes of stuff. Because here's the thing, I don't have anything Monday to I don't I can just hear a word in a song and it'll stand out and I will go with it. Or I can walk by somebody and if somebody was having a conversation on the phone and in the grocery store, and it was like had it on speaker. And I heard somebody said it, it just stuck out. And I'm like, I gotta do that. So it's just like how it comes to me. I could be I can hear something on TV, even though I'm not watching it. I could be in the kitchen doing something, and I can just hear something, and it just resonates. And so that's how it happens. Then once I hear it, I gotta kind of put it together to make it impactful, enough in those first 15 minutes. So that's how it happens. So I don't know from day to day what I'm going to talk about, or week to week what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think your life experience has definitely lent to being able to do that. And oftentimes when we go through really hard times, I think the impact, not to say that, I think when the impact is so much greater when you haven't had the easiest time, right? Because you know how impactful words can be, you know how impactful a person can be in your life, you know all of these things. So what is next for Reginald? What is next in regards to whether it's the podcast, whether it's speaking engagements? What's the next thing for you?
Well, next thing is pursuing more speaking engagement, because I am a life and motivational coach and a motivational speaker. Um, that's one of the things we're going to put a more focus on. I just started adding the new. You talked about it a minute ago on the on our segment. We got an answer segment to the show. You call in, I'll send an email or whatever for a question you want me to answer, and I would answer for you and give you advice on it and things like that. So we just started that, and it comes out every Thursday, and we just started it last week. So this week will be the second week that we've done that. A lot of things moving. I was had a contract. Well, got a contract that with a radio station in Atlanta that airs my show, and just found out this week that they're want me to be added to the Denver, Colorado station, and then the TV station they have in San Francisco, California.
Wow. Well, you know what? When you know what those channels and stations are going to be, let me know so we can make sure to add those to the show notes whenever that's going to be, and we can celebrate you. And I think that's awesome. I know you have your Instagram, your Facebook is Real Talk, and your threads are Real Talk with Reginald. Your TikTok is Real Talk Reg D. Twitter is Real Talk or X Real Talk Reg D, and YouTube Real Talk with Reginald and with two D's. All of those have two D's, but we'll make sure to put the links for all of that in the show notes. Reginald, I always give people the opportunity because I know we talk about a lot of different things, but I always want to make sure, like, if there's anything that you think we didn't touch on that you want to share, that you have the opportunity to do that.
Well, I always like to be a voice for people. I want to be a voice for anybody who's living in life and think that it's not going to get better. Anybody who's been hurt, anybody who's been let down and going through things in life, it can get better and it will get better. You just got to keep fighting the fight. I know you get tired. I know you want to give up, but you can't quit. If you quit, you can't win. You got to keep going. And here's the thing: God got you. He has your back. You just got to stay faithful. He has that one moment that he has that is waiting on you. And I'm gonna tell you this real quick before I let you go. Reason I say that is because I was down and out of my life one time, and I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything like that. I was laying in the bed one Sunday morning, and I said, I'm not going to church. I'm just gonna lay here and watch TV. I don't want to see people. I don't want to do anything. And I was couldn't pay my rent. Actually, I couldn't. I was about to get put out. So I ended up getting up out of the bed. Once I got up, I started feeling a little empowered. And what you got to understand in life, once you get up, that's where you can start feeling your power. As long as you lay down on it, you're going to be defeated. So I got the energy up and I said, you know what? I'm going to get ready. I'm going to go to church. So I went to church, left church, stopped by this gas station. I'm out there pumping my gas, and this gentleman walked up to me. I never saw him before in my life. He said, God told me to bless you. And he gave me enough money for 3 months of my rent
What?
and walked away.
Wow.
Now, if I would have stayed and laid in that bed, I would have missed that one moment that God had for me. And that's why I tell anybody that one day you give up, that one moment you give up, could very well be that moment or that day that God's gonna come through for you. So don't quit.
True. Oh, well, I think that's where we need to leave it. There's that's amazing and that's powerful. And Reginald, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing your journey. Mi gente, make sure to check out Reginald's podcast. And until next time.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate you having me on. I really do.
Thank you. Hola, mi gente. Thank you for listening to this episode of the